We continue now at the top of Daf Yomi Aleph and Meseches Menachos. This is Menachos Daf 10a. On the previous summit, the Gemara brought the Mishnah which said that the kmitza, the taking of the fistful by a karban mincha, must be done with the right hand, and if it's done with the left hand, then it is possible, it is disqualified. And the Gemara asked, what is the source for this? And the Gemara brought Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera said the source is from the purification of the Mitzorah. On the 8th day of the purification process, it describes the process of purification, and it says that the oil is poured on the left hand of the Kohen. It says that a number of times, and essentially Rabbi Zera says, based on that, we learn only over there where it says left, it refers to the left, but everywhere else it is supposed to be the right, and therefore the kometz is supposed to be the right. And so the Gemara asked on the previous summit, if that is the case, we can also ask, why does it say, talking about the application of the oil to the mitzorah, it says it's applied, al boen yado hayamonis ve'al boen raglo hayamonis, it is applied to his right thumb and his right big toe. And so the Gemara asked, according to Rabbi Zera, why does it need to say that? We should know where it's applied to, because it already says that the oil is applied to the same blood of the asham is applied, as Rashi here continues, Dahakasa bohen yad v'regel, bedam ha'asham le'el minei. It already says bohen yad v'regel, by the blood of the asham, which is also applied to the mitzorah, so it should be obvious. Why does it have to be repeated if it says al dam ha'asham on the place where the blood of the asham was placed? So obviously that's where the oil is placed. And so why is it written? And the Gemara continues and answers, Chad lahachshir tzedadin. One of them is to say even the sides of the thumb and the toe is good. V'chad lifsol tzidei tzedadin. And the other one is to disqualify tzidei tzedadin, which essentially means the bottom is not going to be good. The bottom of the thumb would be where the nail, opposite the nail on the other side, and the bottom of the toe is not going to be good. And Rashi explains, Chad al bohen, one time when it says al bohen, because it says it twice, it says it by the yad and the regel, so bein the yad, bein the regel, whether by the hand or the foot, but one of them is lahachshir tzedadin, to say that the side is okay, shel bohen, meaning the side of the thumb or the side of the toe, the darshin l'kamon al besamach k'dechsiv yolav mata menashe. We're going to darshan al in that fashion later on, that it means nearby. The chad al bohen, and then the other time it says al bohen, bein the yad, bein the regel, the other one, whether the hand or the foot, lifsol tzidei tzedadin, to say that the tzidei tzedadin is disqualified. You can't apply it over there. Besar hatachton shegeneged akaf, the al amrina v'lo tachas. It could be nearby, but it can't be on the bottom of the thumb. It can't be on the bottom of the toe. That is not going to be good. And the Gemara continues and asks, al dam ha'asham, al mekom dam ha'asham. It actually says twice on the area where the blood of the asham is placed. It says al dam ha'asham and it says al mokom dam ha'asham. Why does it have to say both of those? Rashi explains al dam ha'asham di ashir. By the wealthy mitzorah, there's slightly different karbonos brought depending on the mitzorah. By the wealthy mitzorah, it says al dam ha'asham. V'al mekom dam ha'asham dani, it says v'al mekom dam ha'asham. By the poor mitzorah, lamali, what do we need those for? Kolomar trei kroi lamali, it means to say, why do we need both of them? Bishlama chad kosvei lashmin and diita and shemen al hadam. I understand that one of the psukim can be teaching that the oil is placed on the blood, v'lo etzlo, and not near it, but on the blood. Ela makom dam lamali. What's the point of makom dam? What is that stressing? And the Gemara continues and explains, again, l'mayasu, what do we need both psukim for? Hani tzrichi, these are needed. Ikasav rachmana al dam ha'asham, because if the pasuk only wrote al dam ha'asham, hava mine isei in neskaneach lo, I would say that if the blood is still there, then it's fine, then it can be applied, the oil. But if it's wiped away, it cannot be applied. So kasav rachmana al mekom, that's why it says al mekom, even if the blood is no longer there, one can apply the oil. Because of rachmana al mekom, and if it only said al mekom, hava mina dafka niskanech, then I might think specifically the blood should be wiped away. Aval isei ema have a chatzitza, but if the blood is still there, maybe it's a chatzitza, maybe it's a separation. Kamash malon al dam ha'asham, that's what the pasuk is teaching when it says al dam ha'asham, even if the blood is there, the oil can be applied. And Rashi explains, Hava mina isei in, isei ladam yitin Hashem, and one might think only if the blood is there, you place the oil. Aval niskaneach adam lo yitin Hashem, and if the blood is wiped away, you don't place the oil. And have a chatzitza, maybe you would think that the blood is a chatzitza, bein shem and leboen, it's a chatzitza between the oil and the thumb or the toe. V'liposel, it should be disqualified. The Rachmana Omar al boen, because the Torah says it has to actually be on the thumb directly, on the toe directly. Lahachi itzrich al dam. That's why the pasuk needs to say al dam. But the Gemara continues at the Tudat. Samar Rava says, Me'achar tichsiv al dam ha'asham v'al makom dam ha'asham. Since it already says in the pasuk by the application of the oil by the mitzorah, it says it's placed in the same place as the dam ha'asham, as the blood of the asham. Uchsiva yimonis b'dam, and it says right by the dam, it says it's placed again on his right thumb, his right big toe. Al boen yado ha'yimonis v'al boen raglo ha'yimonis tichsivi b'shemen de mitzorah asher v'ani lamali. We still don't really know why it has to say boen yado Hayemonis, bo and raglo hayemonis. That should be obvious. And Rashi explains, Amar Rava v'chasav yemonis bedam, lomali lemahadir lemichtav. Rava's question is, why does it have to go repeat itself and write yemonis b'shemen? Why does it have to say right by the oil? In other words, we would already understand that it's the right thumb, that it's the right big toe. That word yemonis is not necessary. Lo lichtov lo ba'ani v'lo ba'asher. It doesn't need to write it by the mitzorah that's an ani, that's the mitzorah who's poor. It doesn't need to write it by the mitzorah who's an usher who's wealthy. Nihidi al bo and yeseri. And what the Gemara means is as follows. Granted that the albohen, as we said above, those are necessary. Those extra terms are necessary. The ani uda asher, both by the ani and the asher. Lahachshir tzadin, v'lifsol tzidei tzadin. Again, to say that the side of the thumb, the side of the toe is okay, but the bottom is not okay. Elo yemonis lamali. But still, Rava has a question. Why does it have to say yemonis? Again, we've already said that it's the same area as the dam ha'asham. It seems that yemonis is extra. And so the Gemara continues, Elo Amar Rava, rather Rava says, and Rashi explains, Elo Amar Rava, Lesa lamai da'afke kamitza de smol, pasul, midrashas darba smolis. Rava is rejecting the answer we said on the previous Amud. We don't learn out that the kamitza done with the left hand is problematic, is disqualified from the 4 times that it says left. Again, in the purification of the mitzorah, it says the oil is poured in the left hand of the kohen. Because if that was true, yemonis devein shemen da'ashir, bein shemen da'ani lamali, you wouldn't need yemonis again by the oil. You wouldn't need it by the oil of the mitzorah asher or the mitzorah ani, because again, we've already said that it's always the right, because only in the situation of the oil on the hand of the kohen is it the left. Eli yemonis the shemen da'asher lahid rasha asya. Rather, it's the yemonis of shemen asher that's used for this drasha, as the Gemara now continues. Elama Rava, rather Rava says that yad yad l'kmitza, regel regel chalitza, and ozen ozen l'ritzia. Every term that's used here by the mitzorah, we have a gzeira shava, and we apply it somewhere else. So it says yad over here by the mitzorah, and again it's talking about the right hand, and so we understand by kmitza, this is the real source. That's the source that kmitza is done with the right hand. It says regel over here hayemonis, and so we understand by chalitza it's going to be the right foot. And finally it says ozen, it says the right ear over here by the mitzorah, and we understand by ritzia, which is talking about the piercing of the ear of the Eved Ivri, there also it is the right ear. And Rashi explains, Yad Yad L'Kmitza Ksiv B'Mitzorah Asher. By the wealthy Mitzorah, it's written Yadu Hayemonis. Again, it says his right hand. Delo Itzrich, that's not necessary. Uchsib B'Kmitza Yad, it also says by the Kometz, by the fistful of a mincha, it says Yad. V'Yamale Kapo, it says Kapo, which means his palm. That's the same as a Yad. Ma Yad Mitzorah Yemonis after Kmitza Yemonis. So we learn, just like the hand by the Mitzorah is the right hand, so too by the Kmitza, it's the right hand. And Regel Shemin de Mitzorah Asher talks about the foot. Again, it talks about Bohen Raglo, the right toe. There it's talking about the oil of the Mitzorah Asher, Lemidrish Chalitza, that we learn to Chalitza. By Chalitza, there's the removal of the shoe. B'Gzeira Shava, the Regel, that's also Gzeira Shava. It says Regel both places. D'chsev Nami b'Chalitza, it says by Chalitza, v'Cholza Nalo, Me'al Raglo, it says she takes his shoe off of his foot. Ma Regel de Mitzorah Yemonis, Af Chalitza Yemonis. Just like by the Mitzorah, it's the right foot, so too by the Chalitza, it's the right foot. V'Ozen, the Shemin Asher, the Lo Itzrach, and also it says ear by Shemin Asher. That's also not needed. Asi L'midrash Ozen the Ritzia. That's again to teach us a halacha by the Eved Ivri. D'chsiv v'ratza Adonam ves Ozno Madam Mitzorah Yemonis, after Ritzia Yemonis. Just like the Mitzorah, it's the right, so too by Ritzia, it's the right. V'ach Gzeira Shava mefureshes Berakam de Kiddushin. This Gzeira Shava is in the first parak of Kiddushin. And Rashi continues and explains, V'da'ani lo darish l'hu Rava kidel kamon. Now, when it says right by the ani, the Mitzorah that's poor, that Rava is not darshaning, as we'll say later on. Kol parsha shenem Rav Nishnis lo Nishnis. The reason why it's repeated is because of some chiddush. Sometimes you can have an entire parsha that's repeated just for a specific novel insight, but there's nothing that we're learning from the right over there by the Mitzorah ani. But again, the point over here is that it says Yamin over here, and it's always extra because it already said Al Dam Ha'asham, and therefore we learn to various other places that it is the right. And the Gemara continues, smallest, and they change the girsa over here to da'ashir, smallest da'ashir, the left hand that's mentioned by the Mitzorah Ashir. Again, the oil is poured to the left hand of the Kohen. Lamai also, what is that for? Amar Rav Shisha B'rei Rav Idi, Rav Shisha B'rei Rav Idi says, lifsol yamin de Kohen b'Mitzorah. It's to say that the right hand of the Kohen is disqualified by Mitzorah. Shalo Tomar, you shouldn't say, Uma b'mokom shalo nisrav so small, if in a situation where the left hand cannot be used, nisrav so yamin, then the right hand can be used. So maybe you would argue, b'mokom shenisrav so small, in a place where the left hand is used, eino din shenisrav so yamin, doesn't it make sense that the right hand could also be used? One might have thought that, and therefore the pasuk is saying, again, by this mitzorah, by the purification of the mitzorah, it's specifically the left hand of the Kohen that the oil is poured into. And the Gemara continues and asks, v'idach smallest, the other time it says left hand by the poor, but talking about the poor mitzorah, and v'yad v'regel yamonis dani, also when it mentions yad and regel, the right hand by ani, lamai also, what are those for? And the Gemara says, as Rashi already said, l'chiditana dvei Rabbi Yishmael, it's for what was taught in the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael, called parsha shenemra v'nishnes. Anytime you have a parsha that's said and then repeated, lo nishnes ela b'shvil davar shenes chadish, but it's only being repeated because there must be some novel point, but it could just be one novel point. The point over here is that it mentions mitzorah, purification process by a mitzorah who's wealthy, and a purification process by a mitzorah who's an ani, and there's slightly different karbanos by the mitzorah who is poor, and that's the whole reason that the parsha is repeated, for those variations. But again, you're not supposed to learn anything specific from the left and from the right that are mentioned over there. And Rashi explains, smallest lamayasa, what's the left by the Mitzorah Usher? What is that for? The Usher lo itzrich lamayasa, what's it needed for? Bishlama kama lagufe, smallest velo yamanis elatinyana lamay. I understand the first time it's saying the left and not the right, but why does it have to say it a second time? But mokum shenisrab, so small could go hacha, because one might have thought, if we're including the left over here, tichsiv le'el smallest, kol shekain shenisrab so yamin, maybe the right for sure should be included. Lachi asa, smallest achrina, that's why it says left again, but Usher by the wealthy, b'asher gufi deshino lavakosav la'akev, smolus v'lo yamanis. It's specifically the left hand that the Kohen receives the oil in, and not the right. Vikasha, now Rashi says, if you're going to ask havimir achar miyat, maybe you'll say a double exclusion should be an inclusion. Lav pirchi, that's not a question. The smolus kamo lav mir, the first one's not really an exclusion. The kevan the kaimalon gzeira shava the yad yad lekmitza. Once we're already saying we make a gzeira shava for kmitza that the kometz is done with the right hand. Hava mina nami nidrosh gzeira shava haika, after to have a yamanis, we should have a gzer shava here as well. V'yitzrich lemichtav smol lach shure smol, so it needs to say left to say that it's the left is kosher. Uliolam kol shekain yamin, and yet you still might have thought left and for sure the right. Lachi kasav rachmana smol asachrina, that's why it says left again. Lemuta yamin to say the left and not the right. V'idach smol is the ani miyusar lamayasa. What are we doing with the left that it says by ani? And again, in our gears of the Gemara, what do we do also with the right that it says by ani? And the answer is shenischadish, but there is something novel by the mitzorah who's an ani, who parshas ani nischadish carbon olav yard, because you have a variable carbon over there by the ani, the mitzorah who's an ani. He brings the variable carbon, meaning he doesn't have to bring all animal carbonos, he can bring bird carbonos instead. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rabba Bar Bar Chana, Amar Vishim ben Lakish. Rabba Bar Bar Chana says that Rish Lakish says, Kol Mokum Shenemra Etzba Ukahun. Anytime it says the word Etzba, finger, and it says Kahun, it's done by the Kohen. Eina Eliyamin. You know that it means the right. Kasal Gadaidzach Etzba Ukahuna Ba'ina. Now, initially we think you need to have both terms, the term Etzba and Kahuna. Kidduchsiv, as it's written, V'lokach HaKohen Midam HaChatos Be'etzbo. It says in this pasuk both of the word Kohen and the word Etzbo. V'gamar Mi Mitzorah. We learn from Mitzorah. Tichsiv, it's written over there as well. V'taval HaKohen es Etzbo HaYimonis. It says Kohen, it says Etzbo, and it says Yimonis, it says the right. But the problem is, Hare Kmitza, again, going back to Kmitza, what about the fistful by a carbon mincha? To Lo Ksiva Ba'ela Kahuna, it only says Kahuna, it doesn't say Etzbo over there. Utnan, and we learned in the Mishnah, Kamatz B'smol Puzzle, that if the Kmitza is done with the left, it's puzzle, it's disqualified. And the Gemara continues and answers, Amar Rava says, O Etzba, O Kahuna. It means either Etzba or Kahuna, either one of those terms indicates the right. And the Gemara continues, Amar Abai said, what about when one walks the Evarim, the limbs, over to the ramp of the Mizbeach? Techsibahu Kahun, it's written over there the word Kohen. Techsib Hikrav HaKohen Es HaKol HaMizbeach, it says he brings it all to the Mizbeach. V'yomar Mar, and the master said, Zuho Leches Evarim Lekevesh, this is the bringing of the limbs to the Kevesh, to the ramp of the Mizbeach. Utnana, we learned in the Mishnah, Haregel Shel Yamin B'smol Uveis Ora Lechutz, the foot of the right side of the offering is carried carried in the left hand of the Kohen, and the skin is facing the outside, and so the Mishnah in Talmud is clearly saying that it's carried in the left, that is fine. And the Gemara continues and answers, Ki amrinan o etzba o kahuna. When do we say either etzba or kahuna indicates the right? B'davar hama'akiv kapara. That's only in a part of the avoda that is required for the kapara, for the atonement. That's not true by the holeches evarim lekevesh. That walking over the limbs to the kevesh is not required for the kapara. But the Gemara continues and asks, V'harei kabbalah, but what about the receiving of the blood? Davar hama'akiv kapara, who that is something that's required for the atonement. V'chasa bakuna, and the word kahuna is written over there. T'chsiv, as it's written, V'hikrivu b'nei Aaron hakohanim es adam, zu kabbalah sadam. It says, b'nei Aaron hakohanim, they're the ones v'hikrivu es adam, so it uses the word kohanim, and that's talking about the kabbalah sadam. Utanan, we learned in a Mishnah, kibel b'smol pasel, that if the blood is received with the left hand, it's disqualified. V'Rabbi Shimon machshir, Rabbi Shimon says kosher. And so the question here is, according to Rabbi Shimon, why does Rabbi Shimon say kosher? Again, if it says kahuna, there should be a requirement of the right. And the Gemara continues and answers, Rabbi Shimon Ka'amrit, you're asking a question according to Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon Tarti Boy, Rabbi Shimon actually does require both, meaning he requires both etzba and kahuna, and therefore if it only says kahuna, it's not a requirement that it be with the right. The Gemara continues and asks, Umi Boy, Rabbi Shimon Tarti, does Rabbi Shimon really require both terms? V'atanya, but we learned in a Bryce, Rabbi Shimon Omer, Rabbi Shimon says, Kol makom shenemra yad eina ela yamin, if it says the word yad, it's the right. Etzba, if it says etzba finger, eina ela yamin, it's the right. And so therefore clearly he does not require both terms. And the Gemara continues and answers, etzba lo boy kahuna. If it says the word etzba, it doesn't need to say kahuna. Etzba alone means the right, according to Rabbi Shimon. But kahuna boy etzba, but just saying the word kahuna, that's not enough. We do require the word etzba. If it just says kahuna, then it is able to be with the left. But the Gemara continues and asks, if that's true according to Rabbi Shimon, that ultimately it all depends on the word etzba, not kahuna. Ela kohen lamali, so what's the word kohen? What is that serving? What is the purpose of that word? And the Gemara answers, bikihuno, that word simply means that the kohen has to be wearing the garments of the kahuna. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Yud Amud Beis.